First, I'd like to make a few comments before I begin. One is I've been very, very impressed with the quality of the speakers. I've been very impressed with the extracurricular activities, and I want to make a few comments about that. Very impressed with Jason's magic trick, even though I did not get it right because I followed your instructions. I was very impressed with that. I was also very impressed with, I've never heard of cornhole. Growing up in Brooklyn, I know about stickball and square ball and other games I'd never heard about cornhole. But the quality of the talks was very impressive. Somebody gave a talk using Yoda. And then somebody gave basically a video, which Mike Ryan did, which was really on point relative to the millennials today. I really thought about my kids. You also had a humanitarian here, and that we honored this morning. So I said to myself, what do I got? I got nothing. I got nothing. Just to quote, my famous Brooklyn philosopher, Ed Norton of the Honeymooners, I got nothing. So really, I can't really be in the same league as you guys. But I really wanted to thank the IEEE committee, your spouses, your extended families for the amount of time and effort you really put in creating this. I know it's a volunteer effort, so if we could give them a round of applause, because I know it's definitely a significant effort, and it occupies a lot of your other time, even though you've got responsibilities for family and a job and all the other things. And I'm amazed how you're able to squeeze it in, because this is not a company-sponsored event. It's a volunteer effort, and having done some of these in the past, sometimes it collides with your real life and your work life and your family life, and you make choices. But again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know I echo what other people in the audience feel, and continue the good work. The reason I want to talk about science and statistics and better legacy network reliability, that is a mouthful. If 6 months ago you could have asked someone, what's the probability that I would give this talk and Donald Trump would get elected? The answer would be less than 1%. So, fast forward to January 20th, Donald Trump is President of the United States, and I'm giving a talk on science and statistics. But the reality is, this is really the outcome of 20 years of looking at the legacy network. If you look back in time, if you do a Google search about the death of the PSTN, the death of the PSTN was talked about in 2008, 2009. The FCC mandated that 2018 it would be the actual death of the PSTN. Companies like AT&T and Verizon were looking for regulatory relief. Well, as I can tell, there's about 7 months left in the year, and the PSTN is not dead yet. And why am I saying this? One is that if you look at history, things take a lot longer to either disintegrate or evolve. If you look at the history of telecommunications, if you look at the history of the conversion from analog to digital switching, which probably started in the late 60s with digital transmission, early 70s with digital switching, took about 20, 30, maybe 40 years to really convert from an analog to a digital network. If you look at the same analogy in the wireless network, I think 2G came out in the early 90s. Now we're at 4G, so it took about 20 years for the evolution from 2G to 3G, now to 4G. The point I'm making is that, even though we're talking about NFV and SDN, these are great technologies, and I firmly, firmly believe they are the answer, especially as telcos evolve into data centers. But I'll argue it's not going to happen in the next 5 years. It's not going to happen in the next 10 years. See, I've got the benefit, having been an engineering background, even though I hide that very well, I really look at the money and the economics. I look at the landscape of telecom service providers. And if you look at it, a simple barometer to look at is stock prices. If you look at AT&T stock price and Verizon stock price, it was higher in the year 2000 than it is now, 17 years later. So what does that tell you? Is that the industry is under tremendous competition, tremendous capital constraints, tremendous debt. Now you require a tremendous amount of money to bring in new technologies. Now, what does that mean? It means the legacy equipment is going to be in the network that much longer. Companies like Verizon, AT&T, CenturyLink, they've got obligations to their shareholders. They've got obligations to the people who own the stock. dividend. So I really believe, and you can write this down, that the legacy network is going to be in there 10, maybe even 20 years. Yeah. It's just not economically feasible that you could basically displace these massive numbers of network elements with newer technology in a relatively short period of time. So I based my career and my company based on that conclusion. And as Chris pointed out, you're losing that technical talent. The equipment is getting harder to repair, harder to replace. But from a financial point of view is, how do you deal with that? And I think somebody talked about T-Mobile having an FCC reportable outage and having to pay a $17 million fine. The reality is that's going to start happening more and more in the network. Really, this is the session about dirty jobs. I don't know if people watch Mike Rowe on TV, and he talks about plumbing and cleaning out cesspools. Really, the people who maintain the legacy network are the plumbers, the electricians, the firemen, the blue-collar people. The legacy network is the one that's driving the revenues and the margins that allow you to compete and allow you to invest in the future of NFV, SDN, or 5G. So you can't disregard, you can't forget the legacy network. And it will evolve. It's not going to be there forever. But the pace at which it rolls over is very dependent on economic conditions. Economic conditions meaning stock prices, interest rates, stock market crashes, things like that. And engineers tend to forget that. Tend to forget the economic reality associated with major technological advances. It's about money. It's about money. I can talk for 30 minutes on one slide. This was a presentation.
We'll never get out of here.
Yeah,
Don't do that.
I got started. You're lucky. Last year I had laryngitis, so you're lucky. So the reality is, this is a Bell Labs Lifecycle Management Analytics Group. They prepared these slides. If you know me, you would know these are never my slides. There's no way I would create slides like this. We were doing a study for Verizon looking at some of their voicemail stuff. They had a legacy voicemail platform, Verizon, AT&T had it, and all of a sudden there was a significant number of repairs. And they asked us to look at it, and we started looking at the repair data. This is just brief background. And then I noticed that there were like 1,000 repairs for these legacy platforms, of which really wasn't a large embedded base, and something just didn't sound right. So then I started looking at the data in more detail. Of the 1,000 repairs, 500 were disk drives. Another 20% were power supplies. Another 15% were fans, filters, cable assemblies. So we started analyzing the data and saying, is there a pattern there? And out of that study, Bell Labs was able to put together this analytical tool to help you look at legacy networks, look at it on a circuit pack by circuit pack level. They actually did an analysis for a large European telco that had a legacy SDH network, and the size of the network was actually, it's not a Verizon AT&T size, it's more of a small section of a Verizon and AT&T, and about 19,000 network elements. You're looking at probably 350 circuit card types that are in there, 12 product families from multiple vendors. The network was deployed in the early 90s with the anticipation that it would last well into 2020 and beyond. And you had the legacy PSTN traffic, ATM traffic that was riding over it, private line, mobile backhaul. So it was a big revenue generator. Now what happened? All of a sudden somebody noticed that there was an unusual occurrence. There was an optical card that was being repaired a little bit too frequently. And the question was, what's going on? This doesn't appear to be right. So that was the first telltale sign. And somebody equated to it like a typical horror movie. It was the first drop of blood. And then the music changes and everything gets dark. So someone started to say, this was around 2008, 2009. Will this network last for the next 10 years? Will it last for the next 3 or 4 years? Because they really hadn't made plans. They really hadn't made plans to replace it. So what they started to do is really gather the data. You know, people talk about gold as a commodity, oil as a commodity. Data is the new commodity. It really is. So that engineer that maintains central office records, and probably most of you are too young to even know what central office records are, but the reality is the person who was able to analyze what was in the network and look at by every circuit pack, look at the embedded base, look at the failure rates, look at the repair rates, starting to create a database of all the circuit packs and really identify what was going on. And the reality was that one optical card was just a microcosm. And as I said before, there were about 350 cards, and the network had probably about 100 to 200,000 cards in the network. And most of the business traffic went over this network. So now they're starting to analyze the data, and it's popping up that there's 12 cards that are in much worse shape than that one card, and you're reaching a position where you're reaching end of stock conditions. And what does that mean? Well, there's a failure. You go to the stock room, you want to pull out a spare, put it back in the network. You had reached the threshold where there was no more spare in the stock room. Therefore, that results in an out of service condition. You know, so what is the probability that that's going to happen? And really, they put together this tool that really looked at this, looked at basically creating outage predictions and end-of-life predictions. I always look at things from a network planner perspective. You know, I read this thing from somebody from the TEDx talks and said, you know what, related to something, tell a story. Well, if you are a network planner or a fundamental planner in one of these companies and you're starting to see this data, you have to say, okay, what do I do? Where do I get the data? How do I start to analyze the data? And what do I tell my management? And what is my recommendation? So Bell Labs created the tool to help in that kind of process to really figure out what the impact is of the failures of these cards. Now, from a financial point of view, it was determined that it would take probably 150 million to 200 million euros to replace the entire network. The company didn't have it. But more importantly, it was determined that the failures were occurring at a much higher rate, that the network would come to a crashing halt in 18 months. In 18 months. Now, what they told Bell Labs, and I'm relaying the story, is that typically in a phone company, you can issue an RFP, you can do the selection process, write the statement of work, and it would take about 12 to 18 months to do that whole process. They didn't have the 12 to 18 months. Yeah. Typical bureaucracies, everyone's got to get their point in, the lawyers, the procurement people, the engineers. So I think it's realistic to say it takes 12 to 18 months to get an RFP, baseline, send out, get responses back, and get negotiations. Well, the reality is they didn't have that time. They didn't have that time. So what they started really doing is the analysis. Let's go circuit pack by circuit pack, code by code for 350 codes. I assume that's wrong. And literally start trending the data, modeling it, trying to predict the failure rate, and also trying to validate the data. So a lot of the legwork are being done by the network planners to figure out what's going on a per card basis. Now you get this data, and every executive here, I assume Mike Ryan and Marty, has, don't give me all that bullshit, don't give me all that details. Okay, give me something I can act on. Okay. So now you get the data and you start creating charts that mean something on a per card basis. What's the probability that if I go to the stock room, will the card be there or will the card not be there? So basically the model created parameters. 1% chance there'll be no stock and a 50% chance there'll be no stock. And that was the arbitrary parameters in this model. So here in the span of 6 quarters, you'll see that it goes from a 1% probability or 99% probability that stock is there to a 50% probability that there's no stock there in a period of about 6 quarters. So you start modeling this up, and all that is a variable. What you want to do is create a bookend or a heat map on the bottom that goes from a light shade of red to a dark shade of red to give you an indication how much time is left. What you want to do is get all that data and basically rank order it by time for all the cards in the network. So this is now called the sustainability heat map. So you're looking at the cards and the interval they go from a 1% probability to a 50% probability. Now, 50% probability means that when I get up in the morning and I go start my car, there's a 50% chance that car is not going to start. Well, if you're a service provider, you can't live like that. First of all, you'd be fired. But the reality is that that was just an arbitrary number that could be modified. But if you look at it, the white space to the left, you're okay. It's in a good position. Now you're starting to see that over time, more and more cards, so that first card that they did the analysis, that became 12 cards, became about 40, 50 codes where they had this potential end of stock or out of stock condition over time. And also think of these as candles. Some of these candles burn hot and short, and those are the ones you're worried about, because do you have enough time to react? Some of these candles, like the one that's got the elliptical around it, they may take a lot longer to burn out. So that gives you time. So you're fighting time. You're not really worrying about money. You're fighting time. You create the concept of a heat map. So now you're starting to looking at all these various cards. You rank order them by time factors, and you're looking at how many codes become end of stock in a given year, in a given quarter, in a given time. The reality is that you've got so many things that are conspiring against you. The size of the embedded base, you're looking at the inventory that you've got on hand, the repair rate. The reality is if you send 100 cards in for repair, the reality is not all 100 cards are going to be repairable. And if you look at the bathtub curves, over time, a lot of the repair rates and the failure rates get worse and worse. So you try to model that and create and then validate the model and see what you're doing. Now, you want to make this operational. You know, Marty and Mike Ryan can say, okay, tell me what to do. Okay, this is what you do. You're now trying to figure out how many spares do I need to sustain the product up until a certain time. And let's say you want the product or the network to last to 2018. That's the number of spares you need to acquire, or you need to make sure that the repair vendor could repair it in a reasonable interval, or you need to start thinking about harvesting and decommissioning strategies so you become your own supplier to make sure that network is intact. So it basically defines the cards needed to sustain to a designated date. And you can now figure out an economic model. What is it going to cost us to keep this network going before I need to replace it, or if it goes out of service? The last chart they want to see is what's the probability of an outage. Now, this shows the probability of one or more outages in a given year. And you can see over time, the probability increases until you start to do something. And I mentioned it in the previous slide. You really need to start thinking about, do I start harvesting? Do I start looking for spare parts? Do I start consolidating products? Do I maybe look at combining functions in various product groups? The reality is what the vendor did, of the 350 cards, they identified 40 to 50 cards that they absolutely had to get ironclad maintenance contracts with, where the repair vendors or the OEMs would actually commit to continue supporting the repairability and the life cycle management of those cards for the next 3, 4, 5, or 10 years. And that's how you'll be able to do it. This is going to apply to the next generation technologies. You know, the lessons learned in the legacy, history repeats itself. NFV at some point in time will be replaced by another technology, etc. But you need to manage the old stuff until the new stuff is able to come in. And you need these product lines that coexist. And I'm raising the awareness. Last year, I raised the awareness of the team, did a great job. These are fundamental tools to manage the network so you're ready to put in the new stuff. I'm done.